Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. I don't think you understand how important this video is. This is the end of a journey. You've already learned 9 verb tenses in English. There's only 12. That means today marks the end of your journey. I mean, not with grammar, there's a lot more to learn. But in terms of verb tenses, these are the final 3. The progressive perfect verb tenses, or the perfect progressive verb tenses. We're going to cover all of them today. That's the past progressive, past perfect progressive, the present perfect progressive, and the future perfect progressive. All of them today. Which means you're almost done. Let's do it. So we're not going to go into the whole, verbs are important, yada, yada, yada. You know all that. At least you should. If you don't, there's some review that you should be doing. We're going to jump right into the midst of our perfect progressive tenses. The first thing you need to remember is that with all of the perfect tenses, there is going to be a past participle somewhere in the mix. And with the progressive tenses, it's already been taken care of with this. Been is the past participle of the verb be. And if you remember, with all progressive or continuous tenses, you need the be verb to come before your verb ing, your active verb ing. And here, the work's already been done for you. If you can remember that all of the perfect progressive tenses have built into them been verb ing, you can, have that problem solved. The perfect progressive tenses utilize both a past participle, which will not change. It's always going to be been, and been or been. Always been. Then verb ing, this is always your active verb, the verb ing. That's the verb or the action that's continuing, right? So the only thing you need to remember, again, the only thing that has to change according to the tense, whether it's past, perfect, or future, is the verb to have, which is always the first verb in your perfect constructions. This is actually going to be pretty simple, right? Your past perfect progressive tense is had been verb ing. Your present perfect progressive tense is has or have subject verb agreement been verb ing. Your future perfect progressive tense is will have been verb ing, or, because remember, future tenses, 2 options, be going to have been verb ing and subject verb agreement. So when do we use these verb constructions? Well, with all the perfect tenses, the past and the future pretty much serve the same function. You use them to express the same idea. The only difference is, are you talking about the past or are you talking about the future? So, with the past perfect progressive, you are talking about some sort of, in the past tense, a past cause of some past effect. We're going to get into examples of these after I introduce them all to you, so just bear with me as I go through the explanation first. You may also use the past perfect progressive tense to talk about some sort of action that was happening in the past and was continuing in the past, and then all of a sudden, something else happens to interrupt the action. So those are essentially your 2 basic usages, or the 2 things that you would be talking about when you're setting up in language when you're using the past perfect progressive tense. You're either talking about a past cause, and then the effect would follow, but in the past, or you're talking about an action that was ongoing that was interrupted by some other action. And the same is true for the future. When you think about the future, you would be thinking about some sort of future cause for some sort of, obviously, future effect. Or you would be thinking about some sort of action that's going to extend into the future and then, this will happen. Okay? So, we'll give you examples in just a minute. The thing to remember about the perfect tenses is that the present perfect tense is a little different. So in the present perfect progressive tense, it's not used to necessarily show cause and effect or interruption. What the present perfect continuous is used for is to show a past action that is leading up to the present. So, let's look at some examples. So now let's look at some examples of how we use these perfect progressive tenses in sentences. Remember that the past and the future essentially are doing the same function. You use them to express the same ideas, just in different times, right? So one is going to be talking about the past, the other is going to be talking about the future. And those two functions, or those two purposes, are to express some sort of cause and effect, or some sort of interrupted action. And it's important to remember that the interrupted action doesn't have to be like a rude interruption, like I'm talking and all of a sudden someone bursts in and makes a scene and they interrupt my wonderful video. It doesn't have to be rude. It just means that there was some sort of continuing action and then something happens, and it doesn't even mean that the action has to stop. It just has to be the introduction of a new idea. Let's look at an example. He had been teaching for 5 years when he began these videos. So here we have some person who had been teaching for 5 years when he began these videos. Doesn't necessarily have to be me. I mean, otherwise I would be saying I, but this person began these videos. Maybe he's behind the camera. But the important thing is that there's a continued action and then something changes or new information is added. Maybe he even still teaches on occasion. Who knows? This, though, is the example of that continued action interrupted with new information. And let's look at what else we have. He had been living in the US. He knows English. Here we have the idea of that cause and effect relationship. Somebody might ask, well, why does he speak English so well? And somebody might just assume that this is the reason. Well, he had been living in the US. Obviously, anybody who lives in the US knows English. But then we might get to my story. And I might say, well, hold on. I'll have been living in Korea a decade. I still won't know Korean. So here, I have not yet been living in Korea for a decade. It is at some point in the future where I will hit that 10-year mark in a foreign country. Not yet. But chances are, when I do hit that mark, which is sometime in the future, I'm not going to tell you how far away it is, I still won't speak Korean. I still won't even be able to read it very well, and I still won't have much of an idea of what's going on when people are speaking around me, which is to my shame. But it's also just a fact. So, here, same idea of this cause and effect relationship. It's just a negative effect or a disagreement in terms of what that cause and effect relationship is. I'll have been living in Korea a decade, but I still won't know Korean. And as the mirror image of that first example in the past, we have the second example of the future. I am going to have been traveling for a month before I finally make it home. So here we have that idea that I started traveling, or I will have started traveling, and I will have been traveling for a whole month when I finally make it home. Now that doesn't necessarily mean my traveling has come to an end, because I may be leaving home at another future time, but I'm just giving an idea of that itinerary or that plan. I'll have been traveling for a whole month when I finally make it home. And then maybe at some point after that, I'll be returning to where I began. We don't necessarily know. All we know is that my month-long action will have been interrupted. So, in terms of the past and the future, perfect progressive tenses, you have cause and effect relationships, and you have interrupted actions. Let's look at the present. The present perfect progressive tense gives you some idea of something that happened in the past and has continued, and then you have two options. Either that event that started happening in the past has been continuing up until right now, and essentially it is still happening, or it ended just a short time ago. The present perfect progressive tense is a little bit ambiguous. Let's look at our example. They've been feeling a little under the weather. That just means they've been feeling a little sick. Now, we have two options. Either they've been feeling a little under the weather and they are still feeling a little bit under the weather, or they have been feeling a little bit under the weather recently, and they just recently stopped feeling a little bit under the weather. So our response to this idea is one of two. Either they've been feeling a little under the weather and we should take it easy on them because they're still a little sick. Or they've been feeling a little under the weather, but they are okay now. So here, obviously, their sickness recently ended. Anyway, those are some examples. Let's review.
Perfect progressive tenses.
Wait. I'm sorry. Stop the review. Look, there's one last little illustration that maybe would make this whole idea of the perfect progressive tenses a little easier. Just a picture. So remember that the perfect tenses all use the verb have, whether in past, had, present, has, have, or future, will have, be going to have, plus a past participle. And all progressive or continuous tenses always use the be verb plus verb ing. So when we put the two together, what happens? Well, we always start with the have, and these meet in the been. The been is the past participle and the beginning of the be verb ing of the progressive. So this has always been taken care of for you in these tenses. And then last but not least, your sort of active or your idea verb is the verb ing. So again, I just wanted to clear that up. Hopefully that helps. By all means, continue with the review.
How many verb tenses are there in English? 12. What is true about the pattern for all perfect verb tenses? All perfect verb tenses use the pattern have plus past participle. What is true about the pattern for all progressive or continuous verb tenses? Be plus verb ing. All progressive or continuous verb tenses must include the be verb before the main verb. What is true about the pattern for all perfect progressive continuous verb tenses? Have plus been verb ing. When there is more than one word in a verb tense construction, which word or words may change according to tense? Only the first word of a verb tense construction will change according to tense. Which perfect and perfect progressive tense constructions are most similar to each other? The past and future Perfect and perfect progressive tense constructions are most similar to each other. What is the function or purpose of the past and future perfect progressive tenses? They both show causal relationships or interrupted actions. What are the two possibilities of the present progressive tense? An action being in the past and continued into the present, or it began in the past and ended recently, a short time ago.